What I am about to tell you is the absolute truth, though I am still trembling from the weight of it. My name is Lemuel Young. For all of my 36 years, I have been a devoted member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I grew up in the valleys of Utah, served a mission, and lived what I thought was a perfect life of faith. I thought I knew Jesus. I thought my religion was the only path, and I viewed other Christians as people who only had a small piece of a puzzle I had already solved. I felt secure, even a bit superior, in my rituals and my knowledge. I believed that because I followed every rule and understood every ordinance, I was somehow ahead of the rest of the world. But 12 days ago, on January 9th, everything I thought I knew was stripped away in a single moment. Before I continue, I need you to type ready in the comments, because this is a direct warning about 5 events that will begin in just 4 days on January 25th and change the world forever. The day it happened started like any other Friday. I was in New York for a business trip, walking through Washington Square Park. It was late afternoon and the city was alive with its usual frantic energy. The winter wind was sharp, whistling through the bare branches of the trees, and the arch stood tall against a gray, heavy sky. I remember watching a group of musicians playing jazz near the fountain, their breath visible in the cold air. I felt a sense of pride as I walked, thinking about my family back in Provo, thinking about my standing in the community. I felt untouchable. Then, without any warning, the world tilted. It wasn't a slow fade. It was as if someone had reached into the sky and pulled a master switch. The sounds of the city, the sirens, the laughter, the shuffling feet, all vanished into a heavy, suffocating silence. My chest didn't hurt, but my heart simply stopped wanting to beat. I felt my knees strike the cold stone of the park, and as my vision failed, the last thing I saw was the grit on the pavement. The doctors would later tell me that for 7 minutes I was legally and clinically dead. They used every tool they had to bring me back, but for those 7 minutes, my spirit was nowhere near that park. I didn't see a tunnel. I didn't see a meadow. I woke up submerged in water. It was a vast, dark, and churning sea that seemed to stretch into eternity. There was no sun, no moon, and no stars, yet I could see the ripples on the surface. I felt a terror so deep it felt like it was dissolving my very bones. I struggled to swim, gasping for air, convinced that I had been cast away. In my mind, I started running through my religious checklist. I had paid my tithing, I had served my mission. Why was I here in this dark, cold water? I thought this was the end, that I had been deceived by my own heart. Then I saw a shape in the distance. It was a blurry shadow, dark against the dark horizon, moving across the surface of the water toward me. My heart gripped with a fear I cannot describe. In my religious upbringing, we were taught about the adversary and his deceptions. I was certain this was him. I thought the devil was coming to claim me, to pull me down into the depths of that midnight sea, because my faith hadn't been as strong as I pretended it was. I began to cry out, not for my life, but for mercy. I shivered in the spiritual cold, feeling smaller than a grain of sand. But as the figure drew closer, the darkness didn't grow. It began to change. The shadow wasn't a shadow at all. It was a light so intense, so pure, that my mortal eyes had perceived it as darkness because they couldn't process the brightness. He reached down and took my hand. His touch was warm, like the sun on a summer morning, and suddenly the gravity of the water changed. I wasn't struggling to stay afloat anymore. I was standing. We were both standing on the surface of that churning sea as if it were solid glass, as if the waves were merely a decoration beneath our feet. I looked at him, and the shock hit me like a physical blow. This was not the Jesus from the framed pictures in my meeting house. He didn't have the soft, curated features I was used to seeing. He looked real. His skin was bronzed and weathered by the sun. His hair was dark and coarse, and his eyes, I have no words for his eyes. They burned with a love that felt like a fire consuming my soul, but it was a fire that didn't hurt. It burned away the lies I had told myself. I felt every secret thought, every moment of my arrogance, and every hidden sin laid bare. I realized in that moment that my religion had been a map I was staring at, but I had never actually walked the ground. I had been worshiping my own understanding of him rather than him. "Lemuel," he said. He didn't use his mouth, but his voice echoed through the very cells of my body, vibrating in my marrow. "You have lived by the letter of the law, but you have missed the heart of the lawgiver. You thought you possessed me through your works, but I have called you here so that I might possess you through my grace." I fell to my face on that solid water, weeping. The peace that washed over me was more real than the ground I had walked on in New York. I realized then that all my efforts to be perfect were nothing compared to the simple fact that he was there. He stayed with me on that water for what felt like hours, though time has no meaning there. He comforted me, letting me mourn for the life I had lived in a shell of tradition. Then his expression grew serious. The water beneath us, which had been dark, began to glow with a soft, ethereal light, turning into a massive window that showed the entire world. "I have brought you here to see what must shortly come to pass," he told me. His voice was like a trumpet, yet as gentle as a mother's whisper. The world is entering its final hour of preparation. The noise of man has become too loud, and the hearts of my children have grown heavy with the weight of things that do not matter. You will return, Lemuel, and you will see 5 signs that will manifest before this month of January ends. You must return and tell them to watch, for the window of mercy is shifting. The first vision began to unfold on the surface of the water beneath our feet, dated January 25th, 2026. I saw the world as it is now, hyper-connected, buzzing with electricity, everyone staring into glowing screens in their palms. I saw the massive hubs of technology, the humming towers that transmit the endless stream of images and words that fill our days. Then, in a heartbeat, it all stopped. Every phone went black. Every television screen flickered and died. The massive digital billboards in Times Square in Tokyo became blank slabs of glass. But this wasn't a tragedy or a technical failure. It was what he called a great silence. For 1 hour, starting at high noon in every time zone, the digital world will cease to exist. But it wasn't just the machines, the internal noise of humanity, the constant worrying, the planning, the arguing was hushed by a supernatural force. I saw a mother in a war-torn village, a billionaire in a high-rise office, and a prisoner in a lonely cell. All of them stopped at the same moment. In that silence, every human being on the planet heard a voice. It wasn't a voice that came through the air. It was a voice that resonated from within the center of their own being. It was the voice of the Savior, calling every person by their true name, not the name given by their parents, but the name their soul has known since before the world was made. This will be the great calibration, Jesus explained as we watched the billions of people standing frozen in place. For 1 hour, the language of the world will stop, and truth will speak to the heart of the beggar and the king alike. No one will be able to hide from the sound of their own soul. In that hour, the excuses will vanish. The titles will mean nothing. The wealth will be invisible. Every person will see themselves exactly as I see them. I watched as a man who had spent his life stepping on others to reach the top of a corporate ladder suddenly fell to his knees, his face contorted in a grief he had never allowed himself to feel. I saw a woman who felt invisible and unloved suddenly glow with a radiance because she finally understood her worth in the eyes of the divine. This silence will be a mirror. For some, it will be the most beautiful moment of their existence. For others, it will be an agony of self-revelation that they cannot turn off. The noise of the world is a mask, Jesus said, his hand resting on my shoulder. On January 25th, I will remove the mask. I will remind them that they are not their possessions, their politics, or their mistakes. They are mine. This is the first call, a moment of pure clarity before the shaking begins. Tell them, Lemuel, that they do not need to fear the silence if they have nothing to hide from love. The vision of the silent world was so profound that I felt as though I was experiencing it myself. I felt the weight of that stillness, a peace so heavy it was almost tangible. I saw how, in that 1 hour, the world was unified in a way that no government or movement could ever achieve. For 60 minutes, there were no borders, no religions, no races, just billions of souls listening to the same heartbeat. As the vision of the great silence faded from the surface of the water, the ripples beneath our feet began to change. The light shifted from a brilliant, clear white to a deep, resonant blue, like the heart of an ancient glacier. I felt the atmosphere around us become heavy, not with burden, but with a strange, liquid potential. Jesus didn't move, yet I felt us traveling, drifting across the globe as the date shifted to January 27th, 2026. Watch the lifeblood of the world, Lemuel, he whispered. For too long, man has taken for granted the very elements that sustain him. He has polluted the streams and forgotten the source. On this day, the element of water will become a witness. I saw the world waking up on the morning of the 27th. In a small village in the mountains of South America, a young girl walked to a stream with a clay jar. In a sterile hospital in London, a nurse poured a glass of water for an elderly patient. In a glittering hotel in Dubai, a businessman opened a crystal bottle. At that exact moment, every drop of water on the planet changed its nature. It was no longer just a chemical compound. It became a spiritual mirror. I watched as the young girl dipped her jar into the stream and took a drink. Her eyes went wide, and a look of radiant joy washed over her face. She began to laugh, a sound of pure silver, and I could see her skin, which had been scarred by a childhood fever, smoothing over and glowing with health. To her and to millions of others, the water tasted like something beyond description, a mixture of honey, sunlight, and the memory of a perfect summer day. It was the sweet water. But then the vision shifted to a dark office where a man sat behind a desk, his heart full of schemes to exploit the poor for his own gain. He took a sip from his glass and immediately recoiled, coughing and choking. His face turned a sickly shade, and he clutched his throat as if he had swallowed liquid fire and ash. To him, the water was bitter, more foul than any rot, tasting of the very deceptions he had fed to the world. The water will not harm them physically, Jesus explained, his gaze sweeping across the continents, but it will no longer nourish the soul that refuses to repent. On January 27th, the earth will refuse to comfort the wicked. This is not an act of anger, but an act of restoration. The water is returning to its original purpose, to carry life to those who love life, and to reflect the truth to those who love the lie. Many will find their bodies healed of ailments that have plagued them for decades, but the greater healing will be the realization that they are being known by the very earth they walk upon. I saw hospital wards where the dying rose from their beds after a single sip of water, their lungs clearing and their hearts beating with a new supernatural rhythm. I saw families gathering around kitchen tables, weeping as they shared a pitcher of water that felt like a holy sacrament. But I also saw the terror in the cities. I saw leaders throwing gold and jewels into the streets, desperate for a single drop of water that didn't taste like the bitterness of their own hearts. They tried to filter it, they tried to chemically alter it, but the change was not in the molecules, it was in the spirit of the element itself. The scientists will scramble to find an explanation. Jesus said, a hint of sorrow in his voice. They will speak of minerals and atmospheric shifts, but they will find nothing in their microscopes to explain why the same fountain gives life to one and reveals the darkness in another. It is a sign that the physical and the spiritual are merging once again. The wall between the two is falling. As we watched the world grapple with the miracle of the waters, the vision began to vibrate. The blue light of the sea beneath us started to pulse with a low rhythmic frequency that I felt in my own chest. The date on the surface of the water shifted to January 28th, 2026. Listen, Lemuel, Jesus said, tilting his head. Do you hear the groaning? At first it was so faint I thought it was just the wind. But then it grew, a deep resonant hum that seemed to come from the very core of the planet. It wasn't a noise, it was a song. It was as if the earth itself had finally found its voice after thousands of years of silence. It was a melody composed of gravity, magnetism, and the turning of the spheres. I saw the effects of this sound across the world. In the great forests of the north, the wolves stopped their hunting and stood side by side with the deer, their heads tilted toward the sky. In the depths of the oceans, the whales sang back to the earth, their voices joining the global harmony. Even the flowers seemed to lean toward the source of the sound, blooming with an intensity that defied the winter season. For the people of the earth, the experience was even more profound. Those who were in tune with the Spirit felt a great rest. I saw people who had suffered from lifelong anxiety and insomnia suddenly fall into a deep, peaceful sleep, their bodies vibrating in harmony with the earth's song. It was a frequency of total peace, a divine lullaby that smoothed out the jagged edges of the human mind. I watched a soldier in a muddy trench drop his rifle and weep, not out of fear, but because the sound made the very idea of violence seem like a distant, absurd dream. But for those who had built their lives on the foundation of their own ego, the sound was an unbearable tension. It felt like a high-pitched ringing that wouldn't stop, a pressure in their skulls that made them want to scream. They tried to hide in soundproof rooms, they put on heavy headphones, but the song of the earth was inside their very atoms. It was the sound of the Creator's footprint, and those who didn't want him near felt the approach of his presence as a physical weight. "This is the song of the earth," Jesus told me, his eyes shining with a reflected light. "The creation knows its master is at the door. It is welcoming the king. On January 28th, the frequency of the world will change. The old rhythms of stress, competition, and fear will be interrupted by the rhythm of eternity. My children will feel as though they have finally come home, even while they are still standing in their own living rooms. But those who have made a god of their own noise will find the silence of my song to be a terrifying judge." I saw a man in a crowded city square. Around him, people were hugging each other, their faces glowing with a strange, calm light as they listened to the internal music. But he was spinning in circles, his hands over his ears, his face contorted in a silent scream. The sound was revealing the disharmony of his life, the way he had lived out of sync with the laws of love and mercy. "The earth is a living temple," Jesus continued, his voice weaving into the very song we were hearing. "And on this day, the temple will sing its praises. It will remind every living soul that they are part of a greater whole. This vibration will stay in the bones of the faithful long after the sound fades. It will be a compass for them in the days to come, a way to find one another in the dark. They will recognize the melody in each other's voices. They will know they are not alone." I watched as the storms over the Atlantic suddenly flattened out, the waves becoming like glass in response to the hum. I saw volcanoes that had been smoking for years go quiet, as if the earth was holding its breath in anticipation. The entire planet was being retuned, its strings tightened, and its echoes cleared. It was a preparation of the physical house for the arrival of the Spirit. The vision expanded, showing me the billions of ways this sound was changing the world. I saw children in schools stopping their lessons to hum along with the earth, their young spirits catching the tune effortlessly. I saw the elderly in nursing homes sitting up with a sudden clarity in their eyes, recognizing a song they hadn't heard since before they were born. It was a global homecoming, a moment where the veil between the music of heaven and the noise of the earth was pulled back just enough for everyone to hear the truth. "Tell them to listen, Lemuel," Jesus said, turning to look me directly in the eyes. "Tell them that when the ground begins to hum and the air feels like it is ringing, they should not run. They should sit still. They should open their hearts and let the song wash away the discordant notes of their lives. For on January 28th, I am calling my choir together." The intensity of the song grew until I felt like I was made of nothing but light and sound. The water beneath us seemed to vaporize into a golden mist, and for a moment, I couldn't tell where I ended and the Savior began. It was a state of being that I never wanted to leave, a total immersion in the logic of the divine. But then the mist began to settle, and the surface of the water beneath our feet became dark and heavy once more. The song faded into a gentle, lingering echo, and the date began to shift again, moving toward the final days of the month. I felt a sense of urgency building in the air, a transition from the internal healing of the water and the song to something that would shake the very structures of human civilization. The water beneath our feet suddenly lost its liquid transparency and turned into a dark, polished obsidian, reflecting a world that seemed to be straining under its own weight. The date, January 30th, 2026, shimmered into existence, glowing with a deep, warning red. I felt a tremor go through the surface we stood upon, as if the foundations of the entire universe were being tested. "Lemuel, look at the walls man has built," Jesus said, his voice carrying a weight of authority that made the very air vibrate. Not just the walls of stone and mortar, but the walls of gold, the walls of secret laws, and the walls of pride that keep the brother from the brother. On this day, the strength of the world will become like wax before a flame. '" 'The vision expanded to show the great seats of power. The I saw the massive, fortified vaults of the world's central banks, the high-walled compounds of the elite, and the imposing iron gates of government palaces. These were symbols of a security that had stood for centuries, built on the idea that some are protected while others are left outside. But as the sun rose on the 30th, a strange heat began to radiate not from the sky, but from within the structures themselves. I watched in awe as the massive steel doors of a famous vault in Switzerland began to soften. There was no fire, no smoke, and no sound of tools. The metal simply lost its resolve. It began to drip like honey, pooling on the floor in shimmering puddles. Behind those doors were the records of debts that had crushed entire nations, the ledgers of greed that had kept millions in poverty. As the metal melted, the very records seemed to dissolve. The chains of interest and the shackles of financial oppression simply ceased to exist. This is the melting of the gates, Jesus explained. For too long, the few have stored up the grain while the many starved. On January 30th, I will show the world that their security is an illusion. The gates that were meant to keep the world out will fail, and the wealth that was hoarded will be revealed as nothing more than dust and dross. I am breaking the power of the hoarders so that the hands of the givers may be filled. The vision moved to a great capital city. I saw leaders sitting in high rooms, surrounded by guards and layers of security. Suddenly, the walls of their rooms became as clear as glass, and then they too began to soften and flow. The secrets they had whispered in the dark were suddenly audible to the people in the streets. The plans they had made to exploit the weak were written in the air for all to see. There was a great panic among those who relied on shadows, but among the people, there was a rising tide of realization. I saw a man who had lived his whole life on the streets of a major city. He was walking past a massive estate that had always been guarded by iron spikes and cameras. He watched as the spikes curled and melted into the earth. The gates swung open, not by force, but because the very concept of keeping him out had vanished. The owner of the estate, a man who had never known a day of want, came out onto the lawn. Instead of calling the police, he looked at the man on the street, and for the first time he saw a brother. He beckoned him in. The melting is not just of metal, but of the hardened heart, Jesus said, his eyes filled with a profound light. The structures of power are falling so that the structures of love can be built. On this day, the world will see that no gate is strong enough to keep out the spirit, and no vault is deep enough to hide from the truth. The things that men have worshipped, their currencies, their borders, their titles, will be revealed as the temporary things they are. I saw the borders between nations, once marked by fences and censors, becoming open meadows. The soldiers walked away from their posts, not because they were defeated, but because the desire to defend a line on a map had been replaced by a desire to return home. It was a global surrender to a higher law. It was the most terrifying day in history for those who loved power, but it was the day of jubilee for those who had been forgotten. As the vision of the melting gates reached its peak, the obsidian water beneath us began to ripple and thin. The dark surface started to glow with a soft, pearlescent light, and the date January 31st, 2026 appeared. This was the final day, the climax of the month of wonders. The final veil, Jesus whispered, and I felt a chill of holy awe run down my spine. The world has lived in a narrow room, Lemuel. They have seen only what their five senses could tell them. They have believed they were alone in a silent universe. But on the last day of this month, I will pull back the curtain. I looked up, and the sky over the entire earth began to shimmer like the surface of a bubble. It rippled and pulsed with colors that have no name in our language. It was as if the atmosphere was being folded back by invisible hands. And then I saw them. The air was suddenly filled with the presence of the heavenly host. They weren't the winged babies of art, but towering beings of light and fire, standing on the hills, walking through the cities, and hovering over the homes of the humble. Their presence brought a weight of glory that made the very ground feel holy. But even more shocking was the second layer of the vision. I saw a woman sitting in her garden, weeping for a son she had lost years ago. Suddenly, the air in front of her rippled, and there he was. He wasn't a ghost. He was more real, more solid than the chair she sat on. He reached out and touched her face, and her sorrow was swallowed up in a joy that surpassed all understanding. All over the world, the thin places became open doors. The lonely saw their guardians. The orphans saw their parents. The veil between the world of spirits and the world of flesh became as thin as a spider's silk. "This is my final invitation for this season," Jesus said, his voice echoing with the sound of many waters. "I am showing them the reality of their eternal home. I am letting the light of the next world spill into this one, so that no soul can say they did not know. This is the opening of the final veil, the moment where the spiritual and the physical become one for all to witness. It is the last call for the weary to come unto me before the great work of the new age begins." I saw the effect this had on humanity. The arguments of the skeptics were silenced. The doubts of the faithful were turned into sight. The world stopped its frantic rushing and simply stood in a state of holy wonder. I saw millions falling to their knees, not out of fear, but out of a recognition of the sheer beauty of the divine. It was a global epiphany, a moment where the purpose of all creation was made manifest to every eye. "Those who respond to this light will be the lamps for the days that follow," Jesus told me. "They will carry the memory of this glory in their hearts, and it will be their strength when the world tries to return to its old ways. But the world can never truly go back. Once the veil has been parted, the heart can never again be satisfied with the shadows of the cave." The vision of the open heaven was so intense that I felt my own spirit beginning to dissolve into the light. The water beneath us, the Savior standing beside me, the visions of the earth, it all began to merge into a single, blinding point of love. I felt a pull, a calling back to the cold, the noise, and the weight of my mortal body. "Go now, Lemuel," he said, and he placed his hand over my heart. "Tell them that their king is not a memory, but a presence. Tell them that the month of January will not end as it began. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob has remembered his children, and the time of the great awakening is here." The next thing I knew, I was opening my eyes in a hospital room, the harsh fluorescent lights stinging my pupils. The rhythmic beeping of the machines was a jarring contrast to the song of the earth I had just heard. Rachel was there, her eyes red from crying, her hand clutching mine so tightly it hurt. The doctors were crowded around, their faces a mixture of disbelief and professional confusion. They told me I had been gone for 7 minutes. They said it was a miracle I was even conscious, let alone speaking. But I knew. I knew the truth that lay behind the veil. I knew that the man I had been, the proud, rule-following Lemuel Young, had died in that park, and someone else had come back in his place. I tried to tell the doctor, a man named Dr. Aris, about what I had seen. He just smiled that sad, professional smile and told me that the brain does strange things when it is starved of oxygen. He spoke of chemical releases and hallucinations. But then he went to change my IV. As he pulled back the tape on my left arm, he stopped. He stared at the skin just above my wrist. There, imprinted into the flesh, was a faint, shimmering mark, a perfect circle that seemed to hold a hint of that pearlescent light from the final vision. It wasn't a bruise, and it wasn't a scar. It was a seal. He rubbed it, tried to wash it away, but it remained, glowing softly in the dim light of the room. He didn't have an explanation for that. It has been 12 days since I returned. 12 days of trying to find the words to explain to my family and my community that the map we've been following is not the territory. I love my people, and I love my heritage, but I have seen the face that all our rituals were meant to point toward. I have felt a love that doesn't care about the labels we put on ourselves. My son David, who is a scientist, looks at me with a mix of pity and fear. He thinks I've had a psychotic break, but I see him looking at the mark on my arm when he thinks I'm not noticing. He can't explain it, and it haunts him. I carry this message now like a fire in my bones. I am no longer the man who thinks he has all the answers because of the church he belongs to. I am just a witness. I am a man who was dead and is now alive, and who was shown the things that are coming to our world in just a few short days. The great silence, the sign of the waters, the song of the earth, the melting of the gates, and the opening of the veil. These are not metaphors. They are the milestones of our immediate future. The love I felt, the authority in his voice, and the perfect harmony between his words and the ancient truths of the soul, it all fits together in a way no human mind could ever invent. I will never be the same Lemuel Young I was before. I carry within me the knowledge of what's coming and the weight of a message that could change everything for anyone willing to listen. Whatever the cost, whatever the consequences, I will be faithful in sharing what I have seen and heard. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob has kept his promise. Jesus has come, and in just a few short days, the whole world will know it too. Thank you for staying with us until the end. If you're still here, it means something in this testimony spoke to your heart. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We want to pray for you and your country. Subscribe if you haven't already, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss what's coming. And please share this video with at least 3 people you care about. A single share can change a life forever. May God bless you and keep you in his truth.